On the 12th of October, 1972, a small chartered plane departed from Uruguay, South America. This plane was headed to Santiago, the capital of Chile. On board were some tall and strong rugby players. A total of 45 people were flying on this plane. Some family members and friends of the players had joined them on the trip. The flight was supposed to be short. Normally, it takes only about 3 hours to fly from Uruguay to Santiago. However, the route crosses the vast Andes Mountains. The Andes, in South America, are the longest mountain range in the world. Aside from the Himalayas, the highest peaks in the world are found here. These majestic mountains would become a nightmare for the passengers. On that day, the 12th of October, a storm brewed in the mountains. Due to the storm, the plane couldn't continue flying. The pilots decided to halt the journey. They planned to fly again the following day. The plane landed in Mendoza, Argentina for an overnight stop. The next day, on the 13th of October, the plane took off at 2:18 p.m. The weather seemed clear, and the flight went smoothly for about an hour. At 3:21 p.m., the pilots began the descent. They were nearing Santiago, but were still flying over mountainous terrain. That's because the city is surrounded by towering peaks. Suddenly, turbulence struck the aircraft as it descended. The plane began shaking violently from side to side. Thick clouds enveloped the plane. Visibility dropped to zero. Only clouds could be seen. Suddenly, alarms blared inside the aircraft. Warning lights flashed urgently. No one could understand what was happening. The rugby players weren't afraid. They joked and didn't take the situation seriously. One of the passengers looked out of the window and saw a break in the clouds. He then realized they were dangerously close to a mountain. As the aircraft emerged from the clouds, the pilot suddenly saw a massive rock face straight ahead. Panicked, they tried to pull the plane upwards. The aircraft's ground collision alarm screamed. The pilots pushed the engines to maximum thrust, hoping to climb over the mountain, but they were too late. The tail of the aircraft hit the mountain. The rear section of the plane tore off. 2 rows of seats and 3 passengers were ejected and vanished. The plane continued ascending briefly, but then it started plunging downwards. Moments later, it hit the mountain again. The left wing snapped off. More passengers were thrown out of the aircraft. Only the front section remained, and it crashed into a glacier. It slid down at 350 kilometers per hour and finally stopped after a 700-meter descent. Passenger seats were ripped from the floor. The cockpit was crushed completely. Both pilots died instantly. The wreckage lay on an unknown peak in the Andes, at an altitude of 3,570 meters. Shockingly, 33 out of the 45 on board were still alive. They had miraculously survived the crash. Many were seriously injured. No one knew where the plane had gone down. Later, it was found the plane had veered 80 kilometers off its intended route, and so began the agonizing journey of survival. This is the tragic and astonishing tale of Uruguayan Air Force Flight 571. Let's explore this story today.
An old transport plane crashed in the Andes Mountains. 45 persons were aboard, given up for dead.
News headlines read, "Plane crashes in Andes, 45 aboard, all presumed dead." But what followed was later called the miracle of the Andes. Right after the crash, 2 survivors were relatively unscathed, 19-year-old Roberto Canessa and 20-year-old Gustavo Zerbino. They were both medical students. They immediately began checking who was alive and tending to the wounded. The medical students worked tirelessly to assist the others. Meanwhile, within an hour of the plane's disappearance, the Chilean Air Search and Rescue Team was alerted. 4 aircraft were dispatched for the search. They looked for the wreckage until nightfall, but they found nothing. They concluded the plane had crashed in a remote, inaccessible location. The aircraft's white color blended with the snow-covered landscape. It made spotting it incredibly difficult. On the night of October 13th, the survivors were hopeful. They believed if they could survive the cold night, someone would find them the next day. But 5 injured passengers didn't make it through the night. The survivor count dropped to 28. They used the plane's broken body as shelter. They blocked the rear with luggage and snow to retain warmth. On October 14th, 11 aircraft from Argentina, Chile, and Uruguay joined the search. They searched the right area. The crash site was within their search zone, but they still couldn't locate the plane. The survivors tried using lipstick to write SOS on the plane's roof. They realized they didn't have enough lipstick to finish the letters, so they arranged suitcases into a large cross in the snow. They hoped passing aircraft would spot it. That day, they saw 3 planes overhead. They screamed and waved frantically, but none of the aircraft noticed them. On October 15th, they realized they needed drinking water. A passenger, Fito Strauch, came up with a solution. He used a metal sheet to focus sunlight and melt snow into water. They collected the water in empty wine bottles. Seat cushions were repurposed as snowshoes. Wool from seat covers helped insulate against the cold. Amid harsh conditions, another issue arose: snow blindness. UV rays reflecting off snow and ice can harm the eyes, and the group had only 3 pairs of sunglasses. On October 21st, rescue teams gave up. It had been 8 days since the crash. They found no signs of life. They believed no one could survive that long, so the search was officially stopped. The survivors found a small radio. It only worked one way. They could hear news but couldn't talk back. On day 11, they heard the bad news. The search was canceled. They were heartbroken. But Fernando Parado stayed calm. He was planning something. They had very little food. There were a few snacks, some chocolate, jam, nuts, and wine. They ate tiny amounts. One peanut lasted Parado 3 days. Soon all food was gone. They tried eating the plane seats. Cotton and leather made them sick. They were starving. Then they made a hard decision. They decided to eat the dead. It was their only chance to live. These were their friends and family. It was painful, but they had no choice. More days passed. On October 29th, an avalanche hit. Eight people died. Now only 19 were left. They were trapped under snow. Parado made a hole to breathe. After 2 days, they got out. A snowstorm came. They hid inside the snow cave again. After 3 more days, the storm passed. They knew no one was coming. They had to save themselves. 3 survivors were strong: Parado, Canessa, and Vizintin. They planned to go find help. They made a joint decision to provide them with additional food and the warmest clothing available to help them survive the journey. They thought they were near Chile, but they were wrong. They were deep in the Andes. On November 15th, they found the plane's tail. It had food, clothes, and a radio. They tried to use the radio, but the battery didn't match. It didn't work. They had no other option. They had to keep walking. On December 11th, another avalanche came. 3 more people died. Only 16 were left. 2 months have been passed to plane crash. On December 12th, Parado, Canessa, and Vizintin set off. They had no gear or maps, only courage and hope. They climbed slowly. It was very hard. They slipped and struggled. Vizintin went back to save food. Parado and Canessa kept going. They reached a peak. They saw snow everywhere, only mountains around them. It was a shocking view. Far away, they saw 2 dry peaks. They walked toward them. After many days, they reached a river. They saw cows. That meant people were nearby. They were too tired to walk. Then they saw 3 men on horses. They shouted for help, but the river was too loud. One man saw them. He said, "Tomorrow," and left. The next day he came back. He threw paper and pencil tied to a rock. Parado wrote a message. He said they were from a crashed plane. They had walked for 10 days. Others were still at the crash site. They needed help fast. The man was Sergio Catalan, a farmer. He read the note. He understood the situation. He rode for 10 hours. He told the army. Parado and Canessa were taken to safety. They had walked 61 kilometers in 10 days. Canessa had lost half his body weight. News spread fast. The Chilean army sent helicopters. Parado guided them to the crash site. On December 22nd, they rescued everyone. All 16 survivors were saved. They were weak but alive. They recovered with care. This story shows the power of hope. With courage, anything is possible. That's why it's called the miracle of the Andes.